I'm going to go ahead and record this. So this is one of these things that we're doing right now through kind of the summer and on Zoom. And we do have, we do record these so that people can come back and watch them and other people can see them who weren't with us. But this is the Gospel According to series. And that's meant to say this is our friend Aleena Watford, and she is going to tell her story of how the gospel has kind of changed her life. And so as we start with that, Aleena, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you. Give us a short bio.
A short bio. I'm a wordy person, so I will try to keep
You're allowed to be wordy. Just, we've got some things to cover, but, do your best.
I am, like we just discussed, I am going to be 47 at the end of this year. I was born and raised in California. When I was 3 months old, though, we moved to, well, not even, when I was 3 weeks old, I moved to Spain and stayed there until I was almost 4 when we moved back. And then since then, I've pretty much been in California until I was 24, but I've been fortunate enough to travel a lot around the US and obviously found my way to Michigan. I went to UCLA for 6 years. I studied history and art history. I taught theater arts, dance, performance, all that while I was in school. And then after I got out of school, I also taught that. And then I guess my Christian journey when I was about 16 years old, I studied the Bible with a friend at the church I was going to, and I got baptized about a week later. And I have been walking with Christ since then. So it is 30 years this December since that date. So it's been pretty cool. It's been kind of amazing. But I've had a lot of ups and downs. I got married in 2002. I had my first child in 98. And then Chico and I have 3 more since then. So we have a 22-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 12-year-old. And we are just doing stuff. I currently freelance as an artist, but I also work part-time at Starbucks to help pay for my children's activities. And I found Rochester Church in, it's been almost 13 years. So it's been just about 2007, 2008-ish is when we found Rochester. So right. I think that covers most of it.
Yeah, that's pretty great. Okay, that's a great intro. Okay, so one of the things that Brad has been doing with folks as he's interviewed them, and I'm kind of pinch hitting tonight, right? Because Brad does a really great job with these interviews, and I am going to try and do a decent job with this interview. But he kind of wants people to tell their story, but he puts it in a little different way. He says, instead of starting at the beginning, right? This isn't simply a biography or an autobiography. He says, I want to start with you talking about turning points in your life.
Right.
That when you look back at your story, do you see 1, 2, 3, however many turning points? And that is who you were and how you felt about life was different after the turning point than it was before.
Right.
And if, what were those turning points? What were the things that jumped out to you as you look back at your life and you say, man, here's some major turning points in my life.
Right. And when I got Brad's questions, that they were very poignant, very particular to grab something. And I thought of several. And outside of like studying the Bible, which for me is kind of an obvious turning point, and my baptism being more of an obvious turning point, I went with the ones probably that were less obvious to me. Those were the ones that are probably the most meaningful. And let's see, the first one being about 5 years after my baptism. And to give you a brief description of my spiritual life, I'm a runner and I'm a super outdoorsy person. So in UCLA, we are kind of in the middle of a green belt area, very similar to the way Oakland University is kind of stuck in the middle of a lot of green area. UCLA is very similar to that. So lots of trees to climb, lots of hills to run, lots of places to go. I used to get up every morning, run 4 miles to my favorite prayer spot, climb a tree and sit in a tree and pray. And if I didn't have enough time to get to my run, I used to climb a couple of different rooftops and get to the top of a roof and pray. It was the best place to go for me because I could scream, I could yell, and I truly believe in having a prayer life like David, where I could say things to God that I wouldn't necessarily say to anybody, because I believed strongly, and still to this day, I can just about say anything to God because he wants me to be my utmost and deepest honest. And I did this every day, read my Bible for an hour and a half every day. And 5 years after my baptism, I got up, I read my Bible, did my 4-mile run, climbed to the top of a roof, and told God that I was more terrified to stay with him than I was to leave him and to try and exist without him. And there are a lot of different scenarios that go into why I might have made that decision. And I can probably bring up 100 different things. But the truth of the matter is, I no matter what the reasoning or what the influence, I still woke up that morning and made that decision. And I carried that responsibility. And from that day forward, I spent the next little over 2 years doing my best to not include God in my life. And that just didn't happen. That was never going to happen. And as much as an individual tries to walk away or leave God or turn their back, God will never leave and will always be standing right there. He was always a breath or a whisper or a wall away from me at every given moment. So I spent 2 years trying to keep him out, and I found myself back right at his feet again.
Yeah.
And that was one of the biggest, probably my baptism is the biggest moment of my life, but this is a really close second turning point to my baptism.
Yeah. So so we'll talk about your baptism here in a minute, but so you got this, you made the conscious decision to try and walk away.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
I know we're both into music. An artist that I really enjoy listening to, David Bazan, is an artist who, he used to be a Christian artist and now he's kind of an agnostic artist. And he also, walked away from his faith, but one of the things he still can't shake some things, and he's very honest in his storytelling and his music. But one of the phrases that he uses that kind of stuck out with me is he said, "The crew has killed the captain, but we still can hear his voice."
Oh yeah. That is one of the best ways I've ever heard that worded. There were a lot of things that happened in 2 years, one of which was having a baby. But before that, I found myself in some real crisis situations because I no longer had the support system of my church and that community. But every time I would find myself in a crisis situation and crying, I could hear God all of the time. And I could hear the words that he had been saying for so many years. I could hear them in my mind. I could hear them in my heart. I could hear them in the songs that I would listen to that even weren't Christian songs. I could hear them in everything I was doing. And one of the points where I found myself back to God is when I realized I was married with a daughter, and I was sitting on the floor crying, and in hysterical tears. I could see with my mind and hear with my heart, as if Jesus were walking through the walls of my room and reaching out to grab me. And I just knew that that was always you, no matter how many times I had tried to erase him from my life and try to do it without him, it just was never going to happen. There was always going to be a hand. I could always feel the warmth. And if I told you all the many, many stories that happened in those 2 years, it would take too long. But the one thing that God kept constant is even these people who didn't consciously have a relationship with him or know him or openly say they loved him were doing things on his behalf. They were keeping me safe without me realizing it, and they were protecting me in very obvious ways. Places that I should have been mugged or hurt or all kinds of the bad things. These people were standing and they were the angels, and I knew that was God trying very definitively to protect me, even though I had made such a decision.
So here's what it brings to mind, this passage from 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 11. It says, here's this trustworthy saying: if we died with him, we'll also live with him. And if we endure, we'll also reign with him. If we disown him, he will disown us. If we are faithless, he remains faithful.
Yeah.
For he cannot disown himself.
Yep. And with that in mind and many other things that come to mind, after returning to my relationship with God and to my church and to my family, my spiritual family, there would be many people that would come and try to confess things that they felt were so tragic and so awful and so horrible. And they were just small mistakes, small hiccups in their lives. And I would always say to them, if I can do what I did to God consciously and out loud, then he can forgive you this. If I can be welcomed back and held so tightly by God, then he will hold you that tightly.
Yeah.
There's nothing it put me in the bottom of the barrel. And there's always that saying, even if I just scrape by, make it to heaven, at least I still made it.
Yeah.
And
that's the person graduating last from medical
to.
school gets called doctor, right?
Right. That's exactly what my husband
in their class
all
for
the time
medical
with
school,
kids.
so gets called doctor. Okay, so I want to rewind a little bit from this moment. I want to rewind and talk about your baptism, because you mentioned it in your intro, in your bio, your brief intro. You talked about studying the Bible with a friend, and then deciding to give your life to Christ at your baptism. Tell me about how we get from there to the turning point, right?
So,
and how many years? 5 years. So 5 years right there.
5 years.
From between baptism
5 years.
to turning point. Just, you don't have to go into great detail. I'm not asking you to tell all your secrets that you're trying to hey, I'm trying to skip over some of this. No, I want to be nice because I didn't tell you I was going to ask this question, but just fill me in a little bit on what's going on.
I think the easiest way to get there is I subscribe to a very legalistic way of interpreting God. And I allowed very legalistic things to happen in my life. And by legalism, it's always the do's, don'ts. It became more about the do's and the don'ts and the rights and the wrongs, and less about the heart and my relationship with God. Even though, like I had described to you, I probably did all the things on paper that should have led me to an incredibly strong relationship with God, which I believe I always had. And a lot of that based on my prayer life with God and what I look at when I look back. But when I looked at my walk, my everyday walk, it was incredibly legalistic. Right. And I allowed myself no room for mistake, no room for error. So the very person that I was coaching after I returned to my relationship with God was the very person I was at the beginning, the person who thought they could earn their way to heaven and had to be perfect.
Yeah. And that's the, that's the trouble with that idea of living for the blessing,
Right.
rather than living from the blessing, right? When I get myself into thinking that the way I live is ultimately what's going to, that I am the person working to make sure I get the blessing,
right,
rather than living from that depth and that place that God loves me and chooses me, I'm sitting there constantly trying to qualify. And eventually, if you even doubt for a moment that the person you're trying to qualify for, if you doubt for a moment that they love you,
yeah,
that becomes miserable.
exactly. And I have
Right?
a lot
That
of
doesn't
like
become joyful faith.
right. And I have a lot of like daddy issues and a lot of things in my past that helped like project that onto God and created this picture of God that really wasn't who he was. And I allowed people around me to distort that picture. I allowed myself to distort that picture, and therefore created a situation where it was just too unbearable to live this quote Christian life anymore. I was exhausted. I was tired. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't be perfect anymore, not realizing I never was.
Right.
So that was kind of how we get from the beginning that my baptism was beautiful. I still think back to it and it's amazing. And I get from this really amazing, beautiful place to a very distorted place in 5 years.
Right. So, okay, you have the turning point where you walk away and God won't let you.
Right.
And then you come back and you are that prodigal son, right? That prodigal daughter. And God welcomes you back and says, "You're mine. You were lost and now you're found. You were dead, now you are alive."
Right.
After that, what's another kind of turning point that you remember in your walk of faith?
Yeah, in our previous conversation, this was the one you kind of had asked me multiple questions about.
Yeah.
So I had, now coming back to my relationship with God, I was a single mom. I was pregnant at the time. I had her just shortly after I returned. I like restored, if there's not a better term for it, that relationship. And when she was about 2.5-ish, I had this, I still had created the picture in my head about who I was supposed to be and who people were asking me to be and who I thought everyone needed me to be. And now it wasn't that it affected my spiritual life, because I had gotten to the place where I had that in a much better perspective, in a healthy spiritual perspective. I was guiding other women and counseling other women and being a mentor in a lot of other ways for single women, but relationships, like actual relationships with men, really distorted, didn't have a healthy understanding. And so I found myself in a couple, sort of dating relationships. And one of them was a fairly long term. We had dated for just over a year. And I thought it is what I was supposed to have, not because it's what I wanted, but because it was what was, quote, right. It was somebody that loved my kid, or all other, everybody said it was the best relationship to be in. It would have been great. So I made a lot of decisions based on what other people told me was supposed to be the case. And after a year of dating, I guess he was going to propose. I didn't know this, but having dinner with a friend, a spiritual mentor at the time, her and her husband sat us down, and through the course of a dinner, she very keenly became aware of the fact that I had no idea what I wanted for myself, and probably could even identify my own desires or my own needs or my own thoughts of what was right for me. I had basically surrendered to what I felt like everybody else thought was right for me, which was also an extension. God had already figured out that part of me with my spiritual life. He's like, you got to be what I want you to be, not what everybody else wants you to be. He had helped me get that point with the 2 years and the restoration and that sort of thing. But now he was working on my actual life that I'm living. So she prompted me, and her husband got my boyfriend at the time to put a pause on our relationship. And by pause, I mean, here I had dated this man for just over a year, and they got him to agree to let me date other people. And I did not know that he wanted to propose. So this was quite an interesting step. She then took me out for coffee and sat me down and told me that she believed I didn't know what I wanted out of life and that what I needed out of life. So she handed me a notebook and told me to spend as much time with people, men in particular, in a capacity of friendship, going on just, casual dates, coffee, spending time in group functions, but spending time talking to other men, other brothers of my faith, and she said, every time you feel the spark of something in your heart that you like, or that gets a positive response from your heart or your mind, anything, whether it's a physical response, a spiritual, or a mind response, she said, I want you to write it down in this notebook. And it didn't take very long. It took me maybe less than a month. I don't remember it taking very long. I filled this notebook, hundreds and hundreds of things that I wrote in this notebook, of just little things, the way somebody opened a door for me, the way we had an intellectual conversation, the way somebody's smile made me feel, the way somebody's eyes made me feel, the look of a guy, like, was it because he dressed well or didn't dress well? Like, it was basic things, or very like, this man gave the best prayer I've heard in my life and it triggered my soul, or they preached one of the best sermons I've ever heard and it piqued my mind, my heart, all of those things. So some of them were super big and deep, and some of them were just light and superficial. And at the end of it, I realized that I was in a relationship that I didn't like. I didn't like the person. The person didn't bring out the best in me. Nothing about him was anything that I desired. And I had been dating him for a year. And I figured I probably would marry him in the end. And she sat me down and she said, what do you think? And I said, I need to break up with him. And it was the biggest shift in my life, because it was the first time that somebody gave me permission to listen to myself, to listen to what I needed, what I wanted, what triggered or was instinctual in me. It gave me permission to stand up for those things, to say, to not settle for anything, to say, this is what I need in my life, and I shouldn't settle for anything else.
But it began with listening to yourself. Like it
Right.
was this process of self-discovery,
Right.
where you kind of have to make peace with yourself and who you are and some of the stuff that's going on in there, in order for you to realize, here is what's healthiest for me, what's best for me, and what I need.
Exactly. And it affected that permission from her, and the book, and affected not just my decision in choosing a husband or somebody to date. It's now affected my entire life. It affected the way I pick a job. It's affected the way I look at what I want in my home and what I want to do with my kids. It affects even conversations I have with other individuals. It affects all my decisions. It was a turning point in the idea of who I am is of value, and not because I'm just God's kid, but he designed me a specific way to contribute a specific way, and I'm okay with that. Like you said, I'm okay with who I am and what I either am needing or giving to this world.
I think there's so many people who struggle with that, who have trouble getting to that point. And so they enter into relationships that simply fill the emptiness in themselves, but then they're getting into that relationship, putting the onus on their partner to give them their self-understanding and self-happiness.
Right.
And that's a weight that partner can't bear.
Right.
Like they will not be able to do that. And so it's unrealistic and it's unhealthy, but that's where so many of us get into relationships that we shouldn't be in, because we're looking for someone to do for us what only God can do for us.
Yeah. And after like doing that notebook and after breaking up that relationship, I no longer looked at any other man as in a situation of, oh, are they a potential relationship? I didn't. I just went, I am in this world to give, to encourage, to love. And when this person shows up, I'm going to know it. I'm not going to settle for anything else. I'm just going to wait until that happens. So until then, let's have fun and let's encourage and give back to the people that need love and friendship and kindness, and I will figure that out. And Chico walked in. So
I was about to say, so did Chico make it through? Chico obviously made it through the journal, right? He made it through the journal,
he did,
notebook.
which was funny because right, he and I had been friends for about 4 years plus before we went on our first date. And on our first date, he literally had a conversation with me about how he didn't see a single woman in Arizona that could be a potential wife for him. And I said, well, I think that you are keeping your options pretty narrow, and you need to stop being so critical and stop being so narrow-minded and open your eyes to some of the beautiful people around you. And mind you, we had been really, really good friends. I wasn't thinking of me at all. And he just listened and he let me be quite opinionated on our first date. And he went to work the next day and told a gal at work that he had found the woman he was going to marry. And a year later, I studied the Bible with this very woman, and she just sat in awe, because here I sat with an engagement ring to the guy that she goes, he told me a year ago he was going to marry you. And it wasn't until about a week or two, maybe 3 weeks before we got married, that I opened that notebook back up, because I was terrified that Chico didn't fit any of the qualities. But obviously they did, because my heart, I knew it. And I opened it up and I read all of them. And there was only one that didn't fit him exactly. And I wrote them all in a notebook for him and gave him that notebook as our wedding day gift to him. I gave him a bunch of things, but that notebook was one of them. And he, to this day, still has that notebook and he occasionally reads it. But yeah, it is really amazing how God did that, like really did that. That was part of the reason why I knew the decisions we were making in our relationship were the right ones. So.
That's a pretty intense like wedding day gift. You basically gave him like, here's your review. This is how you're doing and how we feel about it. So good luck. I hope you keep it up.
I hope you can stick with it.
That's so great. What an intense gift. That's great. He was like, I got you earrings. No,
he did actually.
Yes.
They were diamonds, but
hey, then it works, right? Oh man, that's
it did.
Great.
It totally worked.
So you mentioned though that this kind of notebook approach, this understanding, it changed everything. It didn't just change relationships with guys. You talked about how it changes the way you parent. Tell me about that.
So for most of you, I think, are sitting out there, are parents. I'm not sure, but what it did was it said that it gave me permission to know my kids myself and to not parent the way everybody, like, because and this kind of gets back to the root of all of it. I've always been kind of a people pleaser, and I'm that person when they say be all things to all men. I can do that pretty easily. I can shift to be what people may need me to be to reach them. But sometimes I shift so much that I compromise who I am. Mm-hmm. And that's in my core. My mom is that. She's me times 2. So this notebook approach to that relationship, like I said, helped give me permission to be me and to be okay with that and not shift so much and change me. And so in parenting, I had the same tendency, especially as a single mom, to listen to what everybody told me I needed to do for my kid. And when I went through that notebook, not only did it shift who I was looking for in my personal life, but it at the same time gave me the permission to stand up and go, this is what my kid needs. This is what I need in this place in my life. And that was still as a single mom. And then that carried into my relationship with Chico, which then carried into our relationship as parents together. He is a huge person. I've learned so much. He's like, this is our experiment, and we get to see what goes on here. And you have your own experiment, and you can do your own thing with your own kids. Mm-hmm. And he's super strong on that. He fights for, this is my family, and I will do what I feel is right for my family. And that's, like I said, the notebook and feeling okay with me has helped me feel the right part of what Chico says, the part of that is, you're right, these are our kids. We do what we feel is the best for our kids. We do, I think, I didn't intend on really talking about this, but I will. So my oldest is transgender, and it is an interesting thing to go through as a Christian person. And I do have to say, Adam, you are one of her favorite people, or his favorite people, because you've always made her at the time and him now feel loved, and you've always sent a message of love from the podium as well as in your life. And he has always felt that love is the biggest statement. And I keep falling back on, not only did she choose to become a he, but he has also had a lot of mental breakdown and disorders, have fought a really hard life from PTSD, so from some very traumatic things that have happened to her and him in the course of their lives. And this stance of, I have to do what's right for my kid and my family and the community that God has given me to usher through this life. That notebook has given me the confidence to say, this is the type of love that this kid needs. And this is the way I'm going to parent this. And there's no judgment in my house. This is my child. This is my blood. And regardless, I will fight to the death for him, and I will protect him, and I will let God take care of everything else after that. I'm just here to love, protect, and keep safe the heart of this individual, and hope that however Jesus is going to reach him, however God is going to touch his life, that will happen. Right. And that whole ability to stand on my own and not feel like I have to follow what everybody else tells me I'm supposed to do is exactly what I needed for this point in my life, for this kid. I did have a lot of prayers of like, okay, God, this is it, right? This is all the trauma, all the things we get. It's just in one kid. All the other ones are going to be cake, right? Because this is enough. So
yeah,
I don't know if he agrees with that one or not,
but man, yeah. And I know I was aware of some of this just because we're friends and we talk.
Right.
And, with Michael in particular, have you talked with all of your kids? Like, yeah. The notebook is so important to you. Do they all just walk around with a notebook now? Like, like if you handed them a notebook and said, look, let me tell you the secret.
Right. I think the boys are getting to that place where I can start working on that with them. The girls and Michael got there first.
Right.
And I've always been a huge proponent with Michael about the book and keeping a notebook and keeping a journal. And being very honest in it and very forthright and being okay. And I think that that space has given him the feeling of safety to be what he's going to be. He still feels like we are going to like come crashing down on him, and we keep having to remind him over and over and over again, we are your parents, we love you beyond anything, you know.
Right.
And I think he's starting to understand that in a real sense, in a true sense. Jasmine is more like a guy in her head. She looks exactly like me. She's very girly like me. But as far as her mind goes, she is her dad. Oh my gosh. It's not even funny sometimes because they like have the same expression and the same look and the same, it's bizarre sometimes. But there's that girl part of her. But what she acquired from her dad that I am so grateful for, I thank God all the time for, is that ability to be, I am who I am, I'm proud of who I am, and I will not let anybody tell me otherwise. And sometimes it can be a little too prideful, but most of the time it's I'm on a mission, I have things to do, and I'm not going to let anybody keep me from doing them.
Right.
And she doesn't suffer from the same inability to recognize what she wants out of her life or for her life.
Right.
Her saying right now is she just, which is hysterical. This is hysterical. She goes, I just know when I decide to settle down with a guy, he better feel special about himself because he's going to be the one, and he better know it. Like, just,
well, all right.
She cracks me up. Right.
That's all he's got to know.
She's always
special. That's right. Gentlemen, you find a woman out there who will treat you like the prince you are.
When they get there.
Exactly. Right. All right. So how did the Notebook, Brad's question is, how did it change you? Not how did it change your circumstances? How did it change you? And I know we've talked a little bit about that, but and maybe a lot about that. But at the same time, I want to get this because then I'm going to ask you kind of this summary sentence where it says, okay, if you took that turning point in your life and boiled it down to one sentence spoken to you by God, Aleena, this is what I want you to know. How would you summarize it? So talk about how it changed you, and then how it reaches that boil it down moment of this is one of the things that I can say I've learned.
Right. And I think we kind of touched on it like a little bit already, like when I was telling you how my mom was and how I was as people pleasers, as shifting, as never having my own opinion, just grabbing the opinions of everybody and saying, okay, this is the opinion I will have. Whether it was as a teenager or as wherever in my life, I never really created from in me the opinion that I believed in and stood on. I just kept absorbing everything from everybody else. I've watched this in my mom's life, and I think I just repeated it. The Notebook changed that for me in the sense of it made me listen to me, and like blocking out, putting on the white noise so I didn't have to listen to everything else, and just listened to who I was designed to be and who I wanted to be. Decide for myself, who do I want to be? And what is the path that I want to be on? And much like my daughter already has in her head at 16, I have a plan. I've created this. I'm on this plan with God, and I'm not going to let anything deter me. And that's what it created in me. It created the permission to find that person and be that person and not sway from that person. Life has happened. A lot of things have happened that have changed the course or altered the plan, but the truth still remains. I will get up and I will find my God every morning, and I will find that connection, and I will be with my God every morning, and I will live a life that gives love and kindness and strength to the people around me. I don't want to take from them, because I believe that that's who I was designed to be. And I was designed by my God to be that person.
So when you say getting down and saying, I found how to be myself, how to listen to myself, how to trust myself, when you get in that place, what I hear you saying is I'm in touch with who I believe God has made me to be.
Right. That's exactly.
Because the immediate, kind of standard Christian response would be to say, well, wait, I don't want you to listen to yourself. I want you to listen to God.
Right. And
But
that's
when
true.
when you're saying listen to yourself and then you describe it, it sounds like you're saying I am listening to God show me who I am supposed to be, who he wants me to be, not who everyone else wants me to be, and not how they would define me. I'm not falling on their definition. I'm falling on God's definition. And I'm only finding that when I search my heart, when I search my soul for what God has put in me to be. That's where I'm getting that. Am I hearing that rightly?
Yeah. That's exactly it. And
Excellent.
when we got to that like summary line of what I would hear or what I would want to say,
Right.
I would want to hear that statement of God saying to me, trust the you that I made you to be. And
Right.
I would want to say that to people. Trust the you that God made you to be. Find that person and be that person and not anybody else. And don't let anybody else define that for you. You have to define it for yourself, and you have to do it with God. Like, you have to do it hand in hand. Otherwise, you might define yourself to be something that isn't with God.
Yeah. Henry Nouwen is a priest and an author, or was the late Henry Nouwen. He had this book called Reaching Out. And Reaching Out, he talks about relationships and healthy relationships.
Right.
And there's kind of 3 steps to reaching out. And the first one is to turn inward, find yourself, find who you are with God, and make peace with that.
Yeah.
Right? That when you can sit alone in a room with God and not panic,
Yeah.
right, about who you are, but to look at yourself in the mirror, warts and all, self and all, and say, all right, I love me.
Right.
Thank you for making me.
Right.
I know I'm not perfect, but I love me, and thank you for making me. When you can get to that place, he says, then you're ready for the next step of relationship, which is to turn outward.
Right.
And to find someone else that you can spend time with. Okay, because then you're no longer developing that codependent thing where you're looking for them to fill you with meaning, or you're looking for them to fix you, or you're looking for them to somehow accomplish this thing that only God could do to you. Only God can get you there. And a lot of people don't take the time to say, okay, I love me, before they go out. And so they get themselves in relationships sometimes where if someone makes them feel valued, they confuse that.
Yeah.
Right, for super healthy. Or if someone, does the things that make them happy, they say, oh, this will never go wrong.
Right.
Until things change, and then they're unhappy.
Yep.
Right? The person lets them down. And so there's so much of this that lines up with kind of what Nouwen was suggesting, that first step to authentic relationship with people, be it your spouse or your friends at work or your best friends socially, or your kids, or the people at church. The best way to develop the most meaningful relationships is to be at peace with who you are.
Right.
And that doesn't mean you never demand or ask better of yourself or want to get better at stuff. It's not. It means that you know that you love yourself. Really, honestly, you see yourself the way God sees you, and you love yourself.
Absolutely. There's a confidence and a strength that comes in that. And the humility of knowing I love who I am. I am so far from the bullseye and from perfect, but I love who I am and what God poured into me, and loving the bruises and the scars. You have to come to terms with that. And I think that even the notebook process did that for me. I continue to this day to keep a notebook always for my life. Like, it is what I note everything now. It is, I've always been a journaler, but now I am a steadfast, always journaling person.
So that's the homework you're giving us, that we may want to try that.
Yeah, and even if you start by just reflecting in the day, I have a section that is just reflecting on the shift at work and how it could have gone better and been and what were the pluses and minuses. I have a part that is just my Bible study, just the I was a history major, so I can't read my Bible without taking a ton of notes, and looking at maps and going back and finding the origins and what words mean. So I have a section of my journal that's just that. And then I have a section of my journal that's memory keeping, and the sparks, all the joys of the day get written down. The things that made my heart sing get written down. The things that made me hurt get written down.
Yeah. Man, first off, shout out for fellow history major. Way to go. There's not very many of us, but we're here. Second, though, I wish we could do a whole other podcast on just the practical, like, logistics of what you're doing. Like you just described, I have a part of my journal for this, a part of my journal for this, a part of my journal for this. I would love to just walk through that with you and learn how to do that, because when someone has 20 years experience at something, right? This is that Bruce Lee moment where he said, don't fear the guy that knows 10,000 kicks. Fear the guy that's practiced one kick 10,000 times, right?
It is true. It is something I've done and love and treasure and value. And I know journaling is different for everybody. And for me, it is a full experience. And for others, it might just be a jotting down. But it is life-changing. It is life-changing, for sure.
Well, I thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Welcome.
And we're kind of running up on our time here, but I am so thankful for you being willing to share your story, parts of it, and especially to talk to us about how the turning points have shown up and the difference that they've made, because those are those moments that we look back on and we say, right there, I experienced the good news. And it's amazing how many of these experiences are not just a one-time experience of that's when I was baptized, but it is since I was baptized, I've experienced this and this and this and this and this. And to be able to see the gospel in all of that, that's kind of the genius of these interviews in this series. And I thank you so much, Aleena.
Thank you.
Do you mind if I ask if anyone else wants to
No, I don't mind.
Ask a question or anything like that? Is there anyone who was listening? Did you have a question or anything you wanted to ask? You're all muted right now, but if you want to ask something, feel free to unmute. And
this is a kind of a odd question, but where in California did you live?
I lived in Los Angeles. I was born and it's just outside of LA. So,
okay.
If you're familiar with the area, it's Monterey Park, which is on the east side of Los Angeles.
I was born in Oakland, California.
Oh, okay.
In the Bay Area.
My family lived up like in San Mateo and San Rafael, Alameda, and my brother currently lives in San Francisco proper right now. So,
I have a sister that lives in San Francisco proper.
This is the California reunion. I spent some years in Corona, in the Riverside area. So yeah,
what's funny is it's faster now to drive from LA to San Diego through Corona. It's faster to go that way now than it is to go around.
And then I know that the Murphys did some West Coast time in California.
Did some West Coast time.
So yeah.
There's not a Dan Henniger and a Lindsay Henniger on here too that would do it.
That's right. Joy, what are you saying?
I would like to know what it was that brought her back.
So there's part of it is like over the course, without getting into a lot of details, I think prior to my baptism, I was always what you'd probably say is like a good two shoes. I never really did or had a life that was very risky or dangerous. I lived a lot by the fear of my father's discipline. When I went to college, I was at college for about 4 years before I left. And in 6 months after leaving, I pretty much could say I had done almost everything that I had never done. And there was a lot of pain in that. There's a lot of desperation. There's a lot of hurt. I think I didn't do a lot of things that hurt a lot of people, but I had all of a sudden been out of the shelter of a community that loved God and experienced what people really could, what other human beings could really do to human beings. And I spent so much time crying and feeling alone. And in my determination to try and keep God away from all of that, I've tried to look to other people. But when I realized I was pregnant with my daughter, it's a very sobering moment in your life. And I realized I had always known, like I said, that morning I got up and prayed joy and said, okay, I'm out, I'm going, you know. The end of that prayer was, but I know I will be back because I know that you're the only way I'm going to be happy. And I know that I cannot have my eternal rest if I'm not with you. But I felt like it was something I had to do. So when I found myself at what I would say is the lowest, most sober moment of my time away, and like I kind of described in a fit of tears and sadness and desperation, I felt God's hands reaching for me and the warmth of him holding my heart in that way. I knew that I could not raise a child without God, and I knew that I could not be happy without God. So that was what motivated the return. I was still living in LA. My mom had moved to Arizona, so I called my mom the next morning and said, hey, I'm going to come out to Arizona, not telling her I was pregnant. Just she had always offered for me to go back to school, get my teaching certificate. So I took her up on that offer. I realized that by the time she came to pick me up, I'd be quite pregnant. So the day before she showed up, I told her I was pregnant. And I returned home and returned back to my church family there in Arizona. Like it wasn't my original church family, but it was our sister church. So I went back there.
Right.
And another question, how did you happen to study the Bible with your friend to begin with?
So my growing up, I was dedicated in the Calvary Chapel when I was young. That's where my mom and my birth father started out. So I kind of grew up with Sunday school. My parents had quite a horrible relationship, and so they divorced when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And my mom kept searching for God, and therefore I kept searching for God and church and family. We went through a bout at the Church of Scientology. We went through a bout at Christian Science. We went through quite a few things. And a friend of hers at work invited her to a Church of Christ there in LA, and we went together, my mom knowing that God was somewhere I wanted to be. She invited us, and we went for about a month. And after the preaching and hearing the people and feeling the love in the congregation and the people we were with, I just asked the woman, because I was a teenager at the time, I asked the woman who was leading our youth ministry there to baptize me. And she goes, oh, well, maybe we should study some things out. And my best friend now to this day, we weren't at the time, we were just acquaintances. She and the youth leader woman, the two of us sat down for 5 days straight and just studied the Bible. And both of them are still to this day my lifelong friends, best friends. We still talk and hang out as often as I am in California.
And what was there a method or something that they studied with you? What exactly did they study with you?
They had a like a kind of a guide that they followed. We studied at first we studied the definition of discipleship. Then we studied like kind of definition of the word or the Bible. studied out like what it meant to be in the kingdom of God. We studied out like sin and what that is, as well as in-depth study of like the cross. And then after we studied the cross, we studied out baptism. I did kind of all that in about 5 days. And then just so that I had a really keen understanding of what I was doing, this idea that I wasn't just going to get into something lightly. And then that was like Monday through Friday, and then I was baptized the Sunday after.
All right. Well, Aleena, thank you again so much for sharing your story, for sharing this information. It is awesome. Thank you for being you and for sharing this with us.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it so much.